So, everyone, we are here to do a discussion on what's referred to as creative emergence, or another way to put it is ethical innovation. And we're taking a look at the impediments to ethical innovation or creative emergence, as well as the holding environment that would evoke more emergence, more creativity, more innovation in a way in which is uh, in alignment with like ethics and pro-social skills and sort of living life on life's terms. How do we do that? How do we see and be in the world in like living life on life's terms, but also creating in a way in which supports something new? So that's our discussion for today. So we're going to start with a little bit of introduction of who's around the room. So, hi again. My name is Majia Lee. I work as a leadership development coach, facilitator. I work also doing organizational development work. I'm also a coach for individuals, couples, and families.
And I'm Georgeanna Lewis, and I'm a psychotherapist in private practice and an instructor in psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy, as is Majia Lee. And I live and work in Minneapolis.
Thank you. Thanks, Georgeanna.
My name's Bob Pepper. I am a retired manufacturing leader, having worked for most of my life in automotive parts manufacturing in 3 different countries, and having spent many years managing or leading large groups of people. The subject matter that we're going to be talking about today is of great interest to me.
And Paula, can you move your camera a little bit? You've got this really a black spot.
It seems like it just wants to be there. I think it's my camera.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah,
All right.
sorry.
No,
I
it's
was I
okay.
was trying to play with that earlier. I don't know what that's about.
Okay.
But
It's
sorry.
okay.
Yes. I'm
Yeah.
Paula
Go ahead.
DeSanto, and I have spent the last 40 years working in the fields of both mental health and substance use disorder treatment. I have worked as a clinician, as an advocate, as an administrator, and as a business owner, really with a very committed mission to try to help create more effective and dignified and caring and compassionate services for people that are struggling with both mental health and substance use issues. And really, I think just embracing kind of whatever it is that people may need to feel better and improve the quality of their lives. So happy to be
Mm,
here.
thanks, Paula. All right. Thanks, everyone. You guys all shared your background. I'm going to share my background. So, yeah, it came into the software development realm, moved my way up to change management, business analysis, and then kind of leadership development and organizational development. I did my doctorate and I wanted to study what it would take to evoke more creativity and innovation within an organizational setting that also has sort of a deepened capacity for ethics and more pro-social and relational capacity, as well as what's referred to as neuroception. I want to understand if we could actually deepen at the organizational level our gut instincts, our street smarts, so we could have that competitive edge. Because the more we have our gut instincts and our street smarts and our ability to detect and evaluate and respond to opportunities and threats, it gives us the details we need to innovate. How do we can't innovate if our heads is in clouds. We need to pay attention to the details of what's happening today to create a new tomorrow. So that was what my doctorate was. And then I started moving into more and more work with related to psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy, and moved more and more into the leadership development realm. All right. Okay. So Paula, do you want to just start with, yep.
Sure. Again, appreciate Majia, you pulling this group together. I am participating with a high level of enthusiasm because, frankly, I'm a bit terrified. Most people that know me would consider me to be very optimistic and kind of one of those kind of people that can handle anything and take care of anything and do whatever needs to be done, whatever challenges we may be facing. But frankly, I feel more worried about the future of humanity right now than I ever have. And certainly as a species, we have faced many daunting times in our history, but I feel very concerned about the trajectory of where we are going. Just out for a walk the other morning, I was looking at a bunch of kids heading to school, and 100% of those children had their head bowed at a 90-degree angle, looking down at a cell phone. And I wonder, one, is this really our future that everybody's going to have their heads down? And if you're looking down, what are you seeing? And if you are consistently engaged with a digital device, you are not having experiences that are based in human relationship and connection, which I think are absolutely essential to our health and our development. So I just worry about the future. And I do believe that it's not only just the youth of today that don't really have any clue about what this may mean for them. It's also adults and leaders. And I think you're right, Majia, to really kind of try to get the attention of the leaders, because I think leaders are the ones that can hopefully influence the present and the future in terms of where we are going. And if we're all kind of also, driven by compulsivity, in whatever ways that may look, which I do believe has a huge digital component, and I think Bob will eloquently speak to some other factors that can certainly lead to compulsivity, but if we are all hijacked by being overstimulated and distracted, and no longer valuing things like heart and connection and human and earth, I think we will continue to not only destroy our planet, but to destroy our species. And I just really am very interested in figuring out how we can get the attention of people that can influence our future, because I do believe we're in trouble.
Thank you, Paula.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, when I hear you share, what comes up for me is we need potentially a new way of innovating that is more supportive to the planet, that is more supportive to humanity, but also doesn't take away from the drive for competitiveness and the drive for that edge, that competitive edge, that business edge that leaders are in the game for. And so how do we hold, or how do we straddle that dialectic where we don't drive ourselves into extinction, but at the same time we don't drive ourselves in the opposite direction towards maybe something that is like deeply round around connection and humanity, and we've lost our edge, our maybe we could call it the predator edge, or that leadership edge to conquer and dominate and move and drive, and that innovative edge to to just devour life. And so we're straddling this dialectic. And I think that to me is the essence, is how do we innovate in this way that respects and honors both sides. Yeah. Anyone else want to share on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something, I was listening to a presentation on Jung and kind of psychic epidemics the other day, and really kind of looking at this split that Jung identified between it could line up with a left brain, right brain kind of split, between on the one side, the left brain, the mechanistic, the abstract, the analytical, the already familiar, analyzing everything in terms of what is already known, and competition is on that side, right? And on the other side, novelty, creativity, cooperation, connection, and there's those splits are all over the place in our society and in our world, and it's not an either or. It's a both and. Jung was really clear about that there needs to be balance between these. You need competition and cooperation. You need the already known and the new and the innovative, right? In order to continue to create and and
Mhm.
emerge. Yeah.
Mhm. It's kind of like living life on life's terms. It's like you need to pay attention to the details of what's happening today, both for your competitive edge, but also to see if you're doing so much extreme harm, you're spiraling humanity in a way in which is causing a global crisis. So again, it's paying attention to the details. What is happening in today, right? And then holding. Can you pay attention to that dialectic or that the dialectic tension between both, and work with that?
And I think totally appreciate that concept of, again, needing to have both. And I agree with that. But I feel my fear again, and from all these fears coming from an eternal optimist is quite odd to me. But regardless, um, that if we continue to allow ourselves to be so hijacked by the compulsivities that are seem to be currently kind of taking up camp in many individuals everywhere I look, not just children, adults too, at the park, the moms and dads watching their kids play aren't watching their kids play, they're on their phones. Couples at the restaurants are on their phones. And so if our nervous systems become so, accustomed to that level of disconnect and stimulation, we as individuals, I don't believe, will be able to thrive in a way that does honor both, that that is balanced. And so I just worry about we're going to be sick. We're going to be sick, and we won't be able to sleep, and we won't be able to calm down, and we will run around in an activated state, which leads us then toward, how am I going to soothe myself? How am I going to, take care of all this compulsive energy? And this is more compulsive behaviors, perhaps, and as we know, this kind of process of addiction, the more that you stimulate, the more you develop tolerance, the more you need. So compulsivity just feeds itself, and next thing you know, it's kind of, into some pretty scary stuff, and or we're drinking or medicating or doing whatever we can to shut things down because our system is so electrified.
Mhm.
I want to talk a little bit about just what I'm picking up from the conversation, and Paula, your initial thoughts, I think for me were very, very important. We live in a society and a culture today that rewards short-term attention. Um, when I look at how we behave now, everything has to be immediate, right? I mean, I grew up as a child. We had one phone in the house. Um, so the idea of having a phone or some way of connecting, constantly connecting, uh, was not did not even exist. And so you don't miss what you don't have, or you don't miss what you don't know. Um, and so it was perfectly natural to have to communicate in other ways. Today, we demand of each other and ourselves, we demand to be connected 100% of the time. And I'm just as guilty. I'm 74 years old, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else. I know I have to force myself to not pick my phone up. So I learned, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Yeah, you can. Give them a phone uh, like we have today, and you don't even have to teach them. The reward system for having that phone is immediate. So how do we break out from this idea that everything has to be immediate, everything has to be short term in terms of reward? Um, when I look at it from a business point of view, organizational point of view, I've worked for companies that focused on long-term strategy, knowing that the short term probably would not reward as much. And then I worked for companies who dismissed the idea of long-term strategy and managed in a very short-term environment. And got immediate rewards. Um, but the long term showed a deficit. So how do we break out from this obsession, this compulsion for immediate, constant contact and feedback? And the contact is not human contact. It's
Mhm.
technological contact.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that constant technological contact and hijacking of attention, to your kind of thesis, Majia, it totally stifles creativity, because there's no way you can be creative without having like a complete, and I didn't mention that I have a master's in creative writing in poetry, and creativity it requires a completely open and uncluttered space,
Mhm.
and time, and no distractions, and kind of sinking into a problem and allowing what wants to arise around that problem to be, and I mean, I can't speak to this. I don't have the business experience, but I'll just say my sense is, and maybe you could speak to this, Bob, that a lot of innovation doesn't happen in those companies that are going for the short-term rewards. They're poaching maybe innovators from elsewhere, and yeah, and not actually creating an environment where that can take place.
That's a great point. Vision requires the ability, or innovation requires the ability to have some level of vision, looking into the distance, looking into the future. Um, and so companies, organizations, people who focus entirely on short-term reward are not going to be able to see what the future might look like.
And if I could just briefly, add on to this concept of immediate gratification, immediate need, the reward, because from a neurobiological perspective and brain structure and brain functioning, the I want it now, immediate need kind of system is in the more primal midbrain, where that's where emotions and knee-jerk responses are generally fueled in the fight or flight response. And that's so again, if that's where we're focusing, that is how, where you focus your attention defines you neurologically. So those are how our brains are starting to develop, or that's the brain states, that's where the real estate is setting up camp. But every time we actually have a knee-jerk response or an impulse, thought, and we think long term, like, no, even though I want this, I really should think about the big picture. Every time we think long term in response to an emotionally based or knee-jerk response and think long term, then that creates, brain activity to the frontal lobes, which is the higher centers that can think, from a metacognitive place and think long term. Every time we do think long term, the brain starts to work and the connections start to go from the midbrain to the executive functioning part of our brain, and we become more naturally, long-term thinkers. But if you don't ever do that, your brain is highly conditioned around that primal brain functioning. And so I appreciate this conversation about, is this really how we want our brains to function, from that primal state of immediate need?
Mhm.
So I think you got a great job admiring the problem. So yeah, where are the solutions?
Yeah, I like the question of how do we break out of this compulsive behavior. So I wouldn't mind touching here on kind of looking at it at a collective level, like how do we break out of this at a collective level? Um, and so maybe this is a discussion around what is psychological splitting. So, because what I'm hearing you guys talk about is a split in our collective and individual psyche. We are intensely focused at a collective level, at the individual and collective level, on stimulation and short-term results, and the seduction of technology, or the seduction of food, the seduction of alcohol, the seduction of whatever is being marketed to us. And it has this charm, the seductive nature. It's something that's so irresistible. Like it has this almost narcissistic quality of being, of like we can't stop but being pulled into it and its power, right? And so what happens is we're constantly actually, as you were talking about, Paula, as we're continually being focused in that direction and being pulled in such a way, then there's something that goes into hiding. There's something that gets split off within the psyche. And so again, we almost feel like we lose our agency because there's such a polarity, there's such a pull. And then we feel like technology is bad and technology is wrong, or food is bad and food is wrong, or alcohol is bad and food. But it's an attempt at trying to get our agency back, and we don't know how to do it other than to project onto that thing that it's bad. But it's not bad. It's just that we're just completely polarized in that direction because we have no anchor on the other side of the teeter-totter. Right? We're just stuck, and we can't walk the teeter-totter and get onto the other side. If we could have some balance, but we're not, especially at a societal level. Our brains aren't strong enough. It's like David and Goliath. How can we, if we're getting this collective pumping towards one side of a let's call it a dialectic, or an opposing tension of the seductive nature, the seductive nature, the seductive nature. And so then how do we stop that? How do we interrupt that? Right? It's about accessing the other side. So I like to bring up, go ahead, Georgeanna.
No. I just wanted to add in, this consideration. This is on the individual level, but it manifests also on the collective, of course. The mental health vulnerabilities, let's say, that make people more vulnerable to phone and internet addiction. And then the phone and internet addiction in turn magnifies the alienation, the stuckness, the freeze, the outrage, the hostility, the hopelessness, whatever it is. So it's a really vicious circle that we're dealing with.
It's a very vicious circle. Yeah. Like a negative feedback loop. And if you think about what creative emergence is, or ethical innovation, I like to use the word creative emergence, it's a positive feedback loop. Feeds it, what arises out of the organization, or what arises out of the system, feeds the system and strengthens the stability, the flexibility, the adaptability, the coherence of the system in which it arose, right? That's healthy innovation. That's healthy innovation. Right? It has a moral fiber to it. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing a negative feedback where it's eroding the system in which it arose from. It's sort of funny. It's like, okay, we're killing ourselves off through our own or through our own innovation, right? But then we're blind to it.
I don't know that we're blind, but I think we actually, a lot of people are very aware, but at the same time feeling a bit helpless. And so I am curious, I think I like this, how you're terming this kind of psychological split. And so, yeah, and you're right, we're kind of caught in this negative feedback loop. So how do we stop the loop, and how do we get to the other side of the teeter-totter so we can start balancing? I'm curious about your thoughts on that, or.
Let me throw out the concept around, like you talked about Jung. Let's talk about Donald Winnicott, and sort of their theories around this. So, as children, how did children develop healthy creative emergence? How do they develop a kind of creativity in which the creativity, or what emerges out of the system, feeds the system in a way in which is healthy, right? How do children do that? Because we have a biological, instinctual, at a bodily level, at a neurobiological level, to create life, to create ideas, to create solutions in a way in which is an alignment with life, in which is an alignment and increases the complexity, the order of the system in which it came from. So if we speak to this at an organizational level, the creativity, or what emerges out of that organization when we are accessing that creative instinct within us, feeds the organization, increases its competitive edge, increases its coherence, increases its adaptability, increases its flexibility and its stability. That's sort of, you could call, universal law of our biology, right? And so we have this instinct within us, this creative instinct. And children are actually continually practicing processes that build this creative instinct. Now, things like technology, and actually, I think education, religion, there's so many forces that hijack this biological process that's being attempted to be developed within children. That's a different story. But it is something that children are trying to exercise. And one of the most classic ways in which children do that is through play. So cops and robbers games. So if you think about a cops and robbers games or Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, what are they doing? They're working with dialectics. They're working with psychological splits. And they're bringing it into integration. But then we stop doing this as adults. And so there's studies out there with the National Play Institute where those individuals that were only allowed to focus on one side of that dialectic, for example, be the helper, the one that performed and they were within like a family setting or religious setting or whatever, some sort of setting where it was really focused that they had to perform or fix or help. And the other side of the dialectic, which is they weren't allowed to be the villain, they weren't allowed to be the robber, they weren't allowed to hold any other archetypal dimension other than that helper performance. Guess what happened to them? They were the most extreme criminals. Those were the studies that were done, that the ones that those that were incarcerated that did the most horrific crimes, there's a link between their inability to their family's disallowance of holding these other archetypal dimensions. Right? So that's what happens at an extreme level when we're not bringing into balance those two sides of the teeter-totter and integrating them.
And I think, Majia, I think that's so clear, but you know what? Our society just does not go for that as adults, right? Sure, we can play cops and robbers all day long as kids, but how as a licensed mental health professional, who's got these images of indeed that, the highly, expert, have a lot of expertise around helping, how then do we embrace this concept of perpetrator, villain, or bad guy, or bad? So how does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I mean,
I've got lots of theories, but I'm going to, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just start with how it looks in therapy, right? It looks like, wearing the transference. Yeah, you think I'm being your, bullying parent right now? Wow, let's really feel that. Let's really feel that in the room, what that's like for you, that feels like I'm being that. And it takes a lot for a therapist to be willing to wear that transference, whether it's in a psychoanalytic session or a psychedelic session or whatever it is, it's critical. So I wonder if there's if that could somehow be a model for something that could be outside of the consulting room.
I had some thoughts flying out of my mind when you were talking, Majia. If I think about kids playing, one of the things that they do, if you listen to a group of kids playing, one of the things that they do is they talk to each other, they argue with each other, sometimes too much, but they argue. Why do they argue? Well, because they haven't learned to be afraid of arguing. And so now move into an organizational structure where there's maybe an autocratic, at least a hierarchical dimension, and you've got people who might have a different opinion, but now there's an element of fear. Where that comes from, we can debate. But there's an element of fear that says, I don't feel comfortable now saying I disagree. Kids don't worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to learn to stop worrying about disagreeing. And I, again, from my experience in business, I've seen it more times than I can tell you about how people, and you can actually watch their body language, and you can see that they disagree. But they're not going to say a word, and we have to. The issue of breaking out of our mold. And allowing people, giving people permission to say, I don't agree with you. Let's talk this out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how technology plays into that. That's something we can talk about, but it's a real thing. I've seen it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
to
like what
just,
both. Go ahead.
yeah, I just want to quickly add to that, there has to be safety to
Mm-hmm.
disagree. You
Yeah,
have to create, it can't be
exactly.
I'm going to come up with an argument that's going to put you in your place. I'm going to get the gotcha. I've actually got uh, you know, an intention to draw you out about this so that I can show you how stupid and wrong you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
So,
so it's about stating an opinion without having to defend your opinion at the exclusion of everybody else's opinion.
Exactly.
mhm. We've lost the art and science and how to play as adults because these conditions that you're naming are all things that children do naturally.
Yeah.
If technology and higher education and social institutions like religion hasn't hijacked it already, and families. But right, transference. What are kids doing when they play cops and robbers or Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker? That's transference. You are going to be the bad guy in
Yeah.
my reality. Okay, you're going to be the hero in my reality.
Mhm.
Right? What is that? We're projecting onto the other some archetypal role, right? That's what you're referring to Georgiana and Bob. Like you're like this is exactly what kids are doing. Like, no, it's my turn. No, it's my turn. Right. And they're still friends. Right. And so they're still able to hold the transference and the countertransference, the projection, the countertransference, and they're still able to hold that tension, that dialectic tension of conflict while still being in relationship. Right. Those are two key criteria that we've lost as adults, and children are more and more losing it. This
And
what needs to come back to answer your question, Paula. These are two examples. But I'm curious what else you guys are.
isn't that what I think what you talked about? Just the word that came into my head was trust.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, kids argue all the time, but at the end of the day, they still trust each other as friends. I think they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
maybe even understand what that means. But where's the element of is there without the element of trust? Trust says that I can disagree with all three of you, but I trust that you'll listen to me, and I trust that you'll respect my opinion, and I trust that you'll come back to me and say, I don't think so, and here's why. Without that element of trust, we won't have the ability to problem solve. We won't have the ability uh, to really understand the other point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just
So
want to say absolutely that going back to that what Georgiana was talking about, the culture of safety, safety and trust, and it's that the environment is conducive to disagreement and play and innovation. And I think, Majia, we had a conversation. I was struggling with a loved one who was really having a lot of difficulty in his decision making, and creating a lot of instability, creating a lot of stress for me, and our dynamic was so clear that I was consistently in that helper savior role. I'm the one that advises and knows better and corrects and compensates and directs and holds all the power. And if I'm consistently holding and quote unquote bogarting, I think was the term you used, that role of savior. Going back to the archetypes again, if we just start with the four fundamental, the savior, the villain, the bystander, and the victim, what role was he being relegated to? Because I was so in my mind driven by necessity to be in the role of savior because the circumstances felt out of control. But then of course he's relegated to one of the others, and whether it's ongoing villain or victim or just opting out and just saying whatever, more of a bystander. So I it was so helpful for me just to have an understanding of those archetypes, and to even question this, to have someone ask me what is happening within you in terms of your own kind of split, if that's all
mm-hmm.
that you do. Are you ever in a victim role? Do you ever allow someone to save you? Are you ever able to just stand back and observe? Do you ever get to kind of go out and go after what you really want? I mean, those those were really interesting questions about my psychological splits, and how have I kept him, my loved one, in these roles. And so just knowing about them, and fostering some insight around those roles, and how are we as individuals and organizationally, collectively, playing those things out. And so I think that was really helpful, was kind of just even insight, and your message that ultimately as humans, there is a signal, there is an innate, wisdom that strives for healing and creativity and, equanimity and health, and just trusting that exists. Those are two really nice pieces of, I think, solution.
You guys are bringing up such good content. I'm like, oh my God, each one of these we could just drill down forever. So I just want to name them. Like we've got like what Bob's saying with trust, and I want to come back to that. And then yeah, Paula, like you bring up a perfect example of what shows up individually within families, but also shows up collectively. And I'd love to drill into that. Um, and then and then at the end of the day, this is my personal experience and my professional experience and my academic experience, is that when we understand that there's a signal that is moving us, in fact, it's driven, it's obsessed with moving us towards greater order, greater aliveness, right? Restoring order to the organism, to the family, to the organization. It's driven that way. Then we can actually, and we begin to learn how to lean on it, we will see how to find our way through compulsivity and addictions. Right? And in many ways, yes, the helper kind of can sometimes thwart or interrupt that process and get in the way of that sometimes if it's overdeveloped and there's a split there. And we see this with leaders. So, often leaders, whether they're a traditional helper, such as in a psychotherapy, or they're a leader where they've been hired to fix or come in with some sort of power to change the organization and change the ship and direct it towards better waters. And dun, 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 they come in as the savior of the organization, right? And everyone talk about a collective projection, right? So this leader, he's coming in or she's coming in with the savior role, and the organization and the employees are looking at them as the savior role. It's massive projection or transference. Like think again, cops and robbers, Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader. You're getting a major, like everyone's going, okay, you get to play this role, right? And how like, and you're supposed to, as an individual, somehow navigate that with that intense transference on you, your own and everyone else's. What's going to get split off in your own psyche as a leader with that intense archetypal transference on you and your own contributing? What gets split off? That, I think it's a prime example. Right? So a huge amount of lack of power, lack of agency, because you're coming in dun, 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 with the answers. So anytime that anytime that might fracture, where it's like, oh, maybe I don't have the answers, or maybe I don't have the power, or maybe I don't have the control, or I don't have the sense of worth, or whatever's underneath that's been hidden is going to get blasted into the recesses of their psyche, right? The other side of that dialectic force. And so then when that comes up and gets haunted by the leader, what do we do as employees? We then shame them, right? Make it worse. And then they shame themselves. So then it gets forced back into the recesses of their psyche even more. Right? And then it's just this, again, Georgeanna, you used the word like negative feedback loop. There's another example of a negative feedback loop. And what's even worse is no one wants to take accountability of their own contribution in that process, right? So, all right, off my little song and dance, my little soapbox.
There's another side to that savior mentality. So I've done some work in the last few years uh, talking to people about racism, specifically how to manage it, how to be an anti-racist. And one of the important elements of that is allyship. And one of the things we always talk about with people that want to be an ally, with all of the best intentions in the world, is especially if let's say it's me. I'm a white male, and I'm gonna help. I'm gonna be an ally to this group of black people, and what we always say is you cannot be the savior.
Mhm.
Your role is not to go in and say, but I'm a white man. I've been leading people all these years. I know how to fix this. And I walk in as the savior and they look at me. First of all, culturally, we're different. And the second thing is, yeah, no, we're not. We we just need your help. We'll tell you what to do. We'll tell you what to do. You're not my savior. And so that can create all kinds of conflict when people take a role that they don't deserve to have and are not equipped to have. And
Mhm.
so those dynamics are very powerful, but not necessarily very positive.
That's a great example, Bob. Great example.
It's what happens when you get to my age. You get lots of examples. Mostly, and what I learned most from is not positive stuff, but looking at things going, that's never going to work. You learn a
Mm-hmm.
lot from negative, negative interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and if I could just add to that too, Bob, I know when we were kind of getting ready to start the recording here today, you mentioned this concept of rewards, and what incentives are there in organizations or in families or in relationships to be outside of, I mean, again, hero, savior, there's a lot of rewards in that holding onto that archetype. And so how as a system, or a family system or organizational system are we have we structured things so that there is kind of a lot of reward around the fixer, the helper, the savior, and you were mentioning this challenge of as an organization, they tout safety and if safety first. But when it comes down to looking at someone's performance indicators and they choose safety over production, it's not rewarded. There's no incentives for that. And so I appreciate that conversation too about really as a system or even again in an individual or in relationships, what are we reinforcing? And maybe kind of back to what you were talking about, Majia, those family systems that only rewarded children that engaged in, the caregiver, helper, savior role. What really how that led to some significant imbalances and potentially harmful behaviors in them. And so I think that's really I appreciate that question because I think that as again in this concept of solutions, it's one thing to have insight as an individual, but really when you look at your organization and what are you reinforcing? So such an important question. Really, what are we reinforcing?
A
Mm-hmm.
big part
Yeah.
of a big part of the ability to lead is understanding the people that you're leading. And one of my worries about technology, and we started back, a little while ago before we started recording this, we were talking about the power of technology and the impact that technology is having on everybody. And one of the things I think people are losing, not just teenagers or kids, but adults as well, is this disconnect that we've got now because of what technology is doing and the inability to really understand the people that we're working with and dealing with every day. Isabel Wilkerson, in a book called Caste, which I highly recommend, talks about how to understand people, and she uses the term radical empathy, which really means you can't be empathetic if you don't really understand. So go do the work. Go do the
Mm-hmm.
work. Find out what that person is going through and what they're thinking and how they're experiencing life. And then maybe you could be a leader, and maybe you could be supportive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how do we get people back to the idea of understanding each other, like truly understanding each other?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get
Mm-hmm.
that from staring with your head down, walking to the school bus in the morning, Paula, to your initial original point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the point about incentives is also so important. Like, what's the incentive to understand each other and to get to that place? Especially in, you know, a capitalist system um, that rewards, in its purest form, rewards productivity above all else.
Mm-hmm.
And um, there's upsides and downsides to that.
Mhm.
But a big downside is, yeah, finding incentives for there to be a more, more open space, more safety, more understanding, more
Mhm.
open space for creativity.
Mhm.
Yeah, you spoke to long-term, Bob, you spoke to companies that have long-term visions, a kind of knowing that they can be more productive in the long term. And then everything is militating against that. Everything in our society, all the technology, all the way that technology is training us, it's training us for short-term, for short-term
Mhm.
benefits and just reinforcing, again, another kind of negative feedback loop.
Yeah. So, Majia, one of the things you talked about earlier today was this idea of this kind of compulsivity, and how in society now we're so compelled to to do something or to be somebody. Um, and one of the things that I worry about in our culture, and I think this is somewhat an American culture versus other places, is this the idea in a work environment is the idea of healing, taking time to heal. Because everything is so competitive, because we are so driven as a society to succeed in whatever we do. Um, and we've attached things like vacation time as a way of healing. Um, there's a there's a guilt trip attached to healing, to vacation in this country, and I've been the victim of that. Uh, can compare that to Europe. Um, Try to get something done in France or Belgium in August. Ain't going to happen.
Mhm. That's very true.
Because the country is on vacation. The country is taking a breath. It's taking time. There's a period in Japan called Golden Week, and I worked for a Japanese company for many years. And try to get a hold of somebody during Golden Week. It's not
Mhm.
going to happen because they recognize that there's a the need to step back, a need to heal, a need to refresh. And our sense of being compelled to succeed and work and drive, um, we've lost that ability, I think, uh, to restore ourselves. And we talked a little bit earlier today about mental health and all of the stresses around work life and the lack of balance. And so all of these inputs create that higher level of mental health problems and levels of stress, which all result, of course, in the inability to problem solve, the inability to think strategically and thoughtfully.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like Bob, what you're saying, I think Georgiana touched on earlier. It's in the restoration, it's in the space that you can become more creative. So you
Mhm.
become more powerful employees and more powerful leaders the more you rejuvenate and restore. Otherwise, you just leak and leak and leak, and then you've got a false sense of power. It's a artificial sense of creativity. It's a not a natural biological sense of power or fire. And maybe other countries know this a little bit more. Georgiana, I want to come back to, can you ask your question? You were mentioning, yeah, can you ask that question again? You were just
The
talking about.
question about it's kind of what's the incentive in a society that is rewarding productivity above all else?
Mhm.
How do you build an
to,
incentive in?
mhm. To deeply, you're asking to incentive towards more attunement and
Mhm.
incentive towards what?
Well, an incentive, yeah. How do you when productivity and that tends to be more and more defined as short term, how do we convince people of the benefits maybe of this, creating more space, creating space for healing, creating safety, creating space for argument, dialogue, that kind of the open space that things can arise into or within, you know,
Mm-hmm.
how do
Yeah.
we convince people of the value of that
Mm-hmm.
when the bottom line, if they're like, that's just going to interfere with, it's going to take people out of their, productive roles for too long. We can't do that. We can't afford that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be competitive, and we're not going to be competitive if we do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love this question.
It's curious because just today I was talking with a colleague. So I own a company, mental health clinic, and the irony is that I was talking with one of my business partners. We co-own, and he said there's some murmurings among the team that they're not feeling necessarily well supported or integrated, or they're confused, or they are wondering about whether what's the situation with the future of our company, the leadership team, what's our financial situation, lots of and we agreed that we would host a town hall meeting of sorts on Zoom, so it would be very easy for people to get to. It wouldn't require them to drive or have to come distances, and also within that Zoom process set up a way for people to privately ask questions or share concerns without being necessarily tied to who they are if they don't, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable. But it's just curious. That literally was this morning that there was a conversation about that, and how we absolutely will make space for that in whatever ways. And it's not grand. It's whether it's an hour or a 90-minute Zoom to take but yet the benefits that the team will, I think, get from a sense of kind of hearing with some transparency and willingness from the leadership team about the organization and the future or the current status, whatever the questions are. But I think you're right. It can't be complicated, and it can't be cumbersome or time consuming. Organizations won't do it. And
Yeah.
I think that's an example of maybe a simple organizational response. But I think at an individual level, it's funny because I've been, in my mind, kind of thinking about these kind of attunement interventions where we help people access their nervous system and understand what it is and get a sense of their internal reality, like this idea that there actually is even an internal reality. What is it? What's going on there? And how within that do I tap that innate kind of creative wisdom to bring some balance to my state of being, so that I am operating from a place of coherence and big picture, and not just a hijacked, overstimulated system. And so I spend a fair amount of time, I think, in my own work and in the work with others around how can we efficiently help people attune to their own internal states, which then will help them attune better to others, and ideally promote self-care. But you're right, unless these are quick and efficient, there is no incentive to do it. Other than, if you really want a healthy team, whether it's your line workers or your leadership, people are going to need to do this, or they're going to cook. They're just going to be cooked. Yeah.
I would say that there is a few incentives. One of them I would like to discuss. So if I think about who comes to me as leaders to do work with me, leadership development coaching, they're all in pain. Leaders who have got, I got it together, big fun, like they don't come to me. I get the ones that are in extreme pain, and they are struggling with a real psychological split, where there's some sex addiction, there's some alcoholism, there's some compulsivity that's running wild in their life, or their marriage is falling apart. So they've got all of their stuff worked out in the organization. That's one side of that dialectic, and it looks real clean, and they're performing and they're making all this money, and something within their family is falling apart. Or maybe they're coming home and they're losing their temper at their children in an extreme way, like where they feel completely out of control. So they've got complete control in their organization, but there's some split. There's some compulsivity that's acting out behind the scenes in shadow. Those are the people that I tend to come into my office. They have major incentive. because their life is on the line, maybe their children's, their family, they're begging for mercy and they have no clue where to go because all of the, this is a little bit of a judgmental word, the superficial solutions aren't working. The behavioral management strategies aren't working, right? They've done the traditional approaches. It's not working. Maybe they've even gone and done ayahuasca 10 times. It maybe given them a little bit of help and that's it's not working. Like, or maybe they're getting some help from all these things, but they're still managing a huge beast on their back. Those people have a significant incentive. And I think this video is one of the target audiences of this video is them. That there is hope. That you can have maybe on some level your cake and you can eat it too. Well, that's a horrible pun. But you can still have your competitive edge. In fact, this comes back to like neuroception. Like if you're able to develop a deep attunement with life and living life on life's terms, what are you doing? You're picking up on the details, the subtle details of the present moment. That's what you need in order to have your competitive edge. You're going to get even better at that. Right? And so it's about recognizing that there might be some fruits on the other side of this that's going to help you restore order. But there's an incredible canvas that the leader would have to go through, or the strategic team would have to go to, because I'm going to assume the whole organization was glued together through this compulsivity and the split. And so it's not to be taken lightly, right? There needs to be a strong holding environment, container to modulate and move towards greater embodiment of order and creativity and innovation. It's going to take innovation, a kind of ethical innovation, to actually get from point A to point B.
I propose that this is a great place to stop because I think you've inspired some really interesting thoughts about this. And ending on a note of there is hope. There absolutely is hope. There's need, and I think as you eloquently just discussed there, a significant urgent need driven by pain and other factors. And there's hope. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.